Well, welcome everyone. My name is Frederick Winsness. I'm with NetHope and the NetHope Solutions Center. I want to welcome everybody to another webinar. Today we're talking about managing supply chain systems for international emergency food aid. And we have representation from MANA and from Oracle NetSuite Social Impacts. Before we get going, we'll go through a little bit of housekeeping, and we'll let the speakers start their presentations. But we want to make this as interactive as possible, so please open the chat window. You do that by clicking on the third icon from the right down below the slides, and you'll see that there'll be some messages going back and forth, and you can ask your questions there as well. And we will do a Q&A session towards the end of the hour today. We are recording this session today, and both the slides that are being presented as well as the recording will be posted in the NetHope Solutions Center, and there'll be an email sent out to everyone that registered for this webinar with the details and the links to all of that. We also will present an online survey at the very end. When you leave the WebEx, you'll actually see a slide. I'm going to show this on the next slide because this gets a little confusing. You'll see this link to an external site or a little warning from WebEx. And we do strongly encourage you to click on the continue button. That will bring you to our webinar satisfaction poll, and it's a very safe place for you to provide a little bit of feedback and input and suggestions for additional webinar topics that we can cover in the future. So thank you in advance for answering our survey. So without any further ado, I'd want to quickly just introduce Troy Hickerson with Mana Nutrition and Kate Daniels from NetSuite. I'll turn it over to you, Kate.
Fantastic. Thank you, Frederick. And thanks to the NetHope family. I feel like, we began this journey together last year, and as founding sponsors for the Center for the Digital Nonprofit, we've been able to interact in various ways with your members and with sort of the NetHope community over the last 6 months. And I find that it's just getting richer and better and more nuanced and more layered, and that, our interactions are taking us into lots of different realms of possibility for technology in advancing the missions of the organizations we all support and work with. So I just want to thank you specifically, Frederick, and Madeleine Noe, who's done a great job kind of bringing us all together and keeping us focused. The subject for today's webinar is one that was kind of ignited last April. I participate in a lot of the NetHope webinars as a participant and listener, and I'm always kind of provoked by the things that come to fruition, or the things that come before us as far as commanding a bit of our attention for an hour out of our lives. And when the conversation started between Mana Nutrition CEO Mark Moore and our head of department, David Geilhufe, back in April at our annual event called Sweet World, I thought this is a dialogue that's got legs. It's got something. And soon after this conversation at Sweet World between David and Mark, Troy and I got on a phone call and began talking about how do we start to take this conversation to the next level? How do we start to harness some of this momentum? And specifically what we're talking about is how do we think about the manufacturing and distribution of ready-to-use therapeutic foods, or RUTFs. We'll use these terms interchangeably, or we'll refer to RUTFs throughout this webinar. How do we think about that process in a way that is infused by and benefits from all of our experience in private sector practices as well? There's no reason in the world that a customer, an Amazon customer, should be able to depend upon his or her delivery of their product in a fast, robust way when the same sort of efficiency is not provided or not available in the nonprofit sector. There's just simply no reason for it. And the cleverer we can be about harnessing and leveraging lessons from the private sector and applying them into the nonprofit sector and vice versa, the more satisfying and impactful all of our work will be. So we settled on this idea of managing supply chain systems for international emergency food aid, because we want to think about this conversation both in terms of how are we leveraging that which is, working in the for-profit sector, in the manufacturing sector, in the services sector, and how do we leverage that for the nonprofit sector. But we also want to keep kind of backing up to 40,000 feet and reminding ourselves that this work is about saving children's lives, and it's about changing the world, and it's about how are we able to leverage technology most effectively to advance the mission of organizations doing important work. So that's a little bit about how we came to this subject. Troy and I have been allowing this conversation to sort of evolve between our organizations. Nutrition has been a long-time customer of NetSuite and was really, born in the cloud, much like we were. So they've been using the NetSuite ERP to manage their systems for quite some time. And we thought we're at this point of evolution of this relationship where we've got something to say. We've got something interesting to share with the world about how MANA is effectively harnessing technology to advance their mission. So we wanted to bring that to bear and bring that to the community and share that learning and then exchange ideas with everyone here. So I do encourage everyone listening to please use that chat window, ask lots of questions, ask probing questions, interact with us, and I'll make sure that we leave plenty of time at the end to have a good Q&A session. So just to move on to the next, just to introduce who we are. So Oracle NetSuite Social Impact has as its mission to offer nonprofits and social enterprises software donations and pro bono services to accelerate social impact, regardless of their ability to pay. So that means that we work with both formally registered nonprofit organizations as well as B corporations and socially oriented for-profit entities around the world to ensure that their work is infused with the highest caliber technology solutions and that they can access those solutions regardless of their ability to pay. So we have a program that sells NetSuite to the nonprofit community, and that's a conversation that you can interact with us around. But we also have a suite donation program for smaller organizations so that they can kind of start their evolution into the base financial management and then eventually into enterprise resource planning. We will use the words Oracle NetSuite and NetSuite. NetSuite fundamentally was the first cloud-based enterprise resource planning system in the world, the first ERP in the cloud. Today, everyone's in the cloud. We can't imagine working not in the cloud, given security of data and the need to access data from the world. But NetSuite was born there, and about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, Oracle acquired NetSuite. And since then, NetSuite has become a global business unit under Oracle. We are international in orientation. Our solutions are international in orientation. Our solutions come in multi-currency, multi-language, multi-tax jurisdiction compliance. And we're working with both for-profit companies in 6 sector verticals and the nonprofit community all over the world to ensure there is a harmonious conversation between various different types of data, from constituent relationship management to ERP to financial management to HR, and ensuring that universe of data is married effectively. We understand that we're part of a nonprofit ecosystem, and we've been having quite a few conversations recently, particularly with NetHope members and in the NetHope community, around data models and how do we think about the nonprofit data model in a way that makes sense and in a way that's responsive and oriented around the ways that international nonprofits really have to manage their data and show transparency to their donors and their investors. So what we know to be true is that we are one of the strongest solutions on the market in terms of financial management and ERP, but we also know that we have gaps. And it's important to have a level of self-reflexivity as a company to know where you are providing the most value and where you are the standout in terms of your product and where you need to connect with and integrate with other companies. So this image is rather busy and certainly full of a lot of logos, but the idea here is that we understand that an international nonprofit has various types and levels of data management requirements. that are incumbent upon them to honor their commitments to stakeholders and to donors and to their communities, and that we understand that what we do is important and fundamental, but it's not everything. And so we connect with and integrate with various other types of software solutions to ensure that the entire universe of nonprofit data management needs can be married under one roof and can talk to each other. And this improves efficiency, it improves quarterly and annual reporting, and fundamentally it allows a leader of a nonprofit to spend less time on the back end and spend more time and attention on advancing the mission of the organization. So as my final slide on NetSuite, as I mentioned earlier, we work with organizations at the very bottom end of the market, so small organizations that are just starting out that need a software donation and operate, we work with the Tri-Valley Coder Dojo, for example, that has $10,000 in annual revenues, and they use NetSuite for their core financials. But then we also work with World Vision USA that uses NetSuite for their ERP and CRM and financial management. So this slide is meant to articulate the way that as an organization enters into the NetSuite universe and using NetSuite as a tool, as the organization grows in size and scale and complexity and perhaps geographical presence, so can their ERP system and so can their technology presence. So at this point, that's a little bit about Oracle NetSuite and who we are and what our social impact department is meant to do. I'm now going to hand over the mic to my colleague, Troy Hickerson, who is an entrepreneur and technologist and who has really led the charge to ensure that Nutrition benefits from high caliber technology to advance its mission. So Troy, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. It's really great to get a chance to talk with all of you and appreciate you being here, and I sincerely hope this is helpful. And as you're speaking to, Kate, it made me think that a lot of the organizations in the NetHope community are clearly using products like what Mana produces or someone else, and so this might be a nice look behind the curtain at what it's like to be the company manufacturing that product and how we interact in the supply chain in ways that might be helpful for us to kind of speed not only delivery but make a bigger impact together. So with that, let me introduce the next slide real quick is a little bit about what we do here at Mana. We manufacture a ready-to-use therapeutic food called RUTF. And it's simply, if you have it in your hand, it looks like about the size of a deck of cards, and it's a pouch with really peanut butter inside, but it's fortified with powdered milk and micronutrient mix, and really designed to meet the nutritional needs of a child that's between 6 months and 6 years old, who they're really right on the edge of the cliff. Unless they get immediate nutritional support, they're not going to make it. And so that's what this is designed for. Really think of it as a food by prescription for kids in a medical setting that local foods are not going to meet their needs anymore, and they need what used to be a feeding tube in a hospital bed, which is difficult to scale, and now they're able to go home with mom and have a week's supply and come back and over a 6-week period, they have a full treatment cycle. So that was kind of the big intervention. I think 2009, 2010, Doctors Without Borders had invented this type of product, and we heard about it and got inspired and said, let's see what we can do to make a bigger impact. And we're unique in that we are a manufacturing company. We own and operate a facility and do that as a nonprofit. So go to the next slide. And so about the cause, so we got into this really, like I mentioned, to help kids that are right on the edge of that nutritional cliff. And there's about 17 million kids affected with severe acute malnutrition, and those are the ones that we're aiming to help. And a lot of the organizations that might even be here on the call, you run programs that help those kids as well. So we appreciate that partnership. So the good news, and there is a good news story here, is a 6-week program is life-saving for these kids. And the longitudinal studies that have been done show about 95% of the kids that go through a treatment plan never go back to that level of malnutrition. So that's exciting. It's hunger is such a big, complicated thing, and we applaud all of the diverse ways that organizations are working to combat hunger, and we've chosen to really laser focus on these kids that are right on the edge of not making it, and we're really thrilled that there's a solution that can bring them back. So next slide, I'd like you to meet the kids we serve. So we call them, these are our shareholders here. As a nonprofit, we don't actually have shares, so we refer to the kids we serve as our shareholders. And this is Dominique after 4 weeks of RUTF, and what's so great is she was a part of a group of kids that were the first kids to receive manna back in Rwanda probably about 7 years ago. So she's about 7 years old now, lives in Rwanda, and what an amazing story of that. We actually just coincidentally were on a trip with a couple folks from Manna back in Rwanda, and asked, what happened to those in those communities where these programs were running, and with the miracle technology of cell phones ubiquitously around the world, the next day a lot of these kids showed up with their moms and parents and had a little impromptu dance party, and it was wonderful. So sharing with you the results there on the ground in a real way, but the logos that you see down below represent really the macro view of RUTF has become the standard of care for all these organizations that run nutrition programs for kids under 6 that are severely malnourished. And there's it's been great work. There's a CMAM for delivery, which is community management for acute malnutrition, which is really a holistic problem because packets of food aren't the answer entirely. There's a lot of systemic issues in how kids arrived at that level of deficiency. And so it's been really wonderful to see the collaboration by those organizations to standardize how those kids are treated. So in the next slide, we as ambitious entrepreneurs wanting to make the world a better place thought this should be simple, right? Let's peanuts and milk and vitamins. Let's make this. And we realized it was really challenging. We knocked on the door of about every peanut butter company in the U.S. and thought this was going to be wonderful, and their marketing people loved it, but nobody could co-pack with us because the requirements were much more stringent for more of a pharmaceutical grade product. We have a lot of other allergens that they don't want in their plant, like milk. And so that really led us to down a path of we should build a dedicated facility. And that in the next slide shows the plant that was opened in 2011, and this was right when it was initially opened, and that was with really the support of Children's Investment Fund out of the UK. They saw the same need of bringing the global price of this intervention down, and there's, as you know, other manufacturers that make the same products, and at the time it was really more of a pharmaceutical grade product, and it was priced that way. And what was, I think, very disruptive and I think did leverage a lot of technology to get us there is we looked at things differently and said, what if we move this from a closed proprietary model to more of a commodity pricing model? So price of peanuts, price of milk, price of vitamins, more of a cost plus from that standpoint. And that was really revolutionary in this space. And then that successfully drove down the entire global price of procurement for RUTF by taking a different approach. And so we did that as a nonprofit, which was important. We also introduced a new mindset, which is more open source, to say rather than a lot of factories when you go, you sign a non-disclosure, they take away your cameras, and now you can go tour the facility if you get to tour it. For us, we're the opposite. We say, hey, if you have a camera, take photos, let people know what we're doing, sign a disclosure agreement. And we joked around with some folks from Bosch. They were from Germany showing us some packaging equipment, and they got a kick out of that. And they actually sent us a signed disclosure agreement saying we're happy to share the work that's been happening. And I share that story more as a stance toward how transparency as a value and technology as an enabler can allow us to share things a lot more broadly, and that can be transformative in a sector. So I think that's it. We're this picture is interesting too. We're actually in rural Georgia, in a town of about 10,000 people that's quite economically depressed, and it's an interesting place to build a factory and operate. When the first 2 years we were there, our cell phones didn't work. We all had to switch to Verizon. We brought fiber to this building, which was very challenging. It was under railroad tracks and getting it there because we knew we needed to be cloud-based. If this was kind of an island that was stuck on its own, we wouldn't have the ability to manage things remotely and all the other operations that demand that. It does happen to be across the railroad tracks from a peanut butter factory, which we've procured the peanut paste from them. That's one of the inputs for the product. So move to the next slide. And I'm looking forward to questions, by the way, so I'll move through my part. And so really technology, our market, and culture, and this theme of bringing transparency and a single view of all the costs in the manufacturing process. So this, as I mentioned, we opened the factory. We had no ERP system, but we had no factory at the time, prior to the grand opening. And we used Excel, like probably most people always do, to pilot something new. And after we figured out our operational process, we were able to do an implementation with NetSuite. And that was, I could talk more about that if anyone's interested as well. And by having a transparent view of all the costs, everybody sees that on their dashboard at Mana. It doesn't matter what your role is. You see the cost of a case of RUTF, and one case is a full treatment cycle for a child. And so there's a sense of seeing the numbers about the impact and the number of lives affected from that day's production, but also seeing the costs that go into that day's production and what's involved in that has been really helpful. The other thing that we I think use technology to shape our market and culture. And so I think I mentioned here the market went down 40% in terms of the finished product cost. And we'd like to think, some part of that was due to, Mana being on the market as a nonprofit manufacturer at scale, which was important. And then the other kind of value that I had there is everyone can see your work. And so as you introduce an ERP system that has that sense of transparency, assuming you implement it with that sense of transparency, you can see the quality status. If you work on this quality team, how many units are on hold, what the reason might be, the cost per unit, sales information, inventory management. We implemented cost centers for all the managers, and that's a real transparent way for them to have control over the costs that they influence, and that's been important as well. And then on the culture side, not a jerk. Our first, I think, T-shirts tell stories, and the first T-shirts we had, I think, said "not a jerk" on the back of them because of a story that we had around. It's easy to hire people. It's easy to hire smart people, but all it takes is one jerk to kind of upset the apple cart a bit. And we all act as jerks at times, but our goal is to not be that way and to identify that and work together. And I had never worked in a manufacturing environment, and so it was an interesting cultural shift for me coming from technology, professional services, and whatnot. And the other one is "we are the they," and hopefully you're not pick on the grammar too much here, but "we are the they" means there is no blaming them for something. They should have done this. It's like that's us. And so those shifts in culture, I don't think would have been as possible, at our organization without the technology factor being there and having that be a transparent part of the way everyone works. So moving on to the next slide. So this is a view of our factory packaging room. So here we actually have it's sometimes interesting to see this, but there's a mixing room behind this, and then there's a premix room, to the left of it. But this is really where the finished product comes through these stainless steel pipes and gets put into 5 different packaging machines, each of which have 2 fillers. And so that's when I say scaling 10x. When we opened the factory, we had 1 filler of 1 packaging machine, and that's it. And we would run and make product 8 hours a day. And now all 10 of them are operating at 24 hours a day, 5 days a week. And it's been amazing to see the organization be able to scale. And our ERP really gave us a lot of readiness for that. And so I think putting that in place meant we didn't have to, do a big upgrade to our informational systems as we scaled our operations. So, and then the other thing that I wanted to mention here is operational excellence. So since we are, a higher standard than kind of FDA food products and more closely aligned with pharmaceutical product, our audit process is very rigorous. UNICEF comes through, World Food Program comes through, and being able to demonstrate our supply chain, all of our raw materials, where they're sourced, all of the certificates of authenticity as they come in, the third-party lab tests, all that gets brought into NetSuite and gives us a view of a day of manufacturing at Mana, which is a lot number, and that being able to pull that up real time and have everything kind of digital in the cloud has been really amazing, I think, for the partners that we work with and the vendors that come through. It's also been helpful, as we have a rural community here, and factory workers that aren't necessarily used to using technology, and forklift drivers that now have Chromebooks and can open up NetSuite and do their specific job through their dashboard. So with the occasional turnover and whatever it might be, designing that system to be useful for them, and something that, in a way, trying to keep it simple, and that I think has been helpful with what we've done with NetSuite. So the last point on this slide is we had some issues about a year ago, and this will lead me to the last slide too, but where, if we have a product quality issue in the field, in maybe a warehouse in Kenya or wherever it might be, getting that information back to us about some packets that had leaked took forever, and then when we got the information, it was really difficult to know the details, and we'd fly out there in some instances and take a look at things and then trace that back. And so we're working on that, and I'll mention that next, but we spent a lot of time this last year on our internal process with finished product quality, and we now have a process as product comes off of each of those 10 different filling tubes. There's some inline weighing systems to guarantee that they're all filled within the 92-gram threshold, as well as a seal test and a verification of the packaging integrity. And all that data is captured by those line operators or captured by inline weighing systems and rolled into NetSuite with alerting systems to let us know if there's an issue. So that's actually been really helpful to have that data available, and in the last supplier meeting at UNICEF, to be able to present that data and show kind of how we've addressed issues that are really affecting all manufacturers, not just us, and hopefully what we're able to share really with that open source model. Even though they're competitors, we love this idea of let's see what we can do to share that information. All right, moving on to the next slide. So this idea that technology readiness has been a theme, and it's been part of our culture and part of where we came from. I think we needed to, because the environment we were in was remote, and we wanted to make sure we were equipped to not be stuck there, and so everything was cloud-based early on, but it really led to unlikely partnerships. And so I briefly mentioned this collaboration with other suppliers. So as we've had a mindset of being more open source, like we're happy to share, we're happy to disclose what we've learned, and hopefully that can help other people. And being a nonprofit that's helping malnourished kids, we hope to be out of business someday because the problem is solved in other ways. But in the meantime, we're here to make not only our organization more efficient at it, but hopefully other organizations as well. So that's pretty unique in our sector. And technology has given us a platform, kind of a stage and a microphone to share what we're doing in ways that if we had cobbled things together in ad hoc systems or ad hoc reporting, you're a lot more hesitant to share that data. And so I think with the confidence we have in our information systems and then the processes that feed into that, it's been really a lot easier for us to make that data more publicly available. And then the other thing it's done too is expanded our public engagement. So if you think of the supply chain for us, the input side has been where we've spent a lot of our time in the past at Mana, is looking at not only the raw material inputs that go into our supply chain, but the funding is an input that allows us to manufacture. And for the kids we serve, there's only funding for about a third of those kids right now. And so we, as well as the organizations that run nutrition programs, they would love to get more products, and they'd love to fill those gaps. And so a couple initiatives that we helped launch, largely because we were sitting in the right spot, and because of our technology readiness, we were able to say yes and make things happen. We partnered with UNICEF USA and kind of co-created UNICEF Kid Power which is a program for kids in the U.S. to get active, and their physical activity is converted into RUTF. Not necessarily that goes to MANA or anything, it just goes to the fund at UNICEF for RUTF. Active for Good, similar program. We do that for adults and in companies, like a corporate wellness program that unlocks RUTF and creates a sense of awareness of the issue, which I think is a big factor, as well as the resources to procure more product. And then in Canada, it's a high school program called Move for Mana, and that is where high school kids get active and their activity turns into RTF. So just wanted to mention those because those partnerships, really wouldn't have been available to us had we not led as an organization that thought about technology and the use of technology. And then this last point of really trying to pioneer the future field distribution reporting. This is a new focus for us, is trying to see how we can better provide data about RUTF in the field. I mentioned earlier when there's an incident with a product, not even just our product, but any kind of product that, let's say, USAID procures, it's got the US flag on it. They care a lot about that incident being reported back to them in a very timely way, as well as we would as a manufacturer. So we're looking at some systems that would, as Kate mentioned, bring the technology that's available in the private sector and really not difficult to deploy. How do we bring that into the aid sector and make the incident response something we can respond to quickly, as well as information about gaps in supply chain in the field, something that we can speed up the time to delivery for those products. So that's all I had for an intro. So appreciate that. I'll hand it back to you, Kate.
Outstanding. Troy, thank you so much. I've been working with MANA for a while and engaging with you around several things, but even just sitting now and hearing your presentation, I'm learning and new kind of thoughts are being stimulated for me as well. So this is excellent. And what I also love about the deck you've just provided us is it allows our departure point to start from much deeper in the conversation, right? We know who you are, what you do, how it works, and that's really interesting from the perspective of not only your partnerships with NetHope members, so I think a lot of the people on the call or those who will listen to this in the coming weeks would have kind of a vested interest in the performance of MANA, but also, I think what you're talking about has knock-on effects or is relevant to and certainly has implications for lots of other types of nonprofit verticals, right? Anyone who's distributing anything to people in need around the world can take lessons from and sort of generate value from some of the things you're sharing now. You mentioned earlier in your presentation how at the beginning, like most organizations, data was managed in Excel. And I would say, I'm still meeting large international organizations that are running off of Excel. So certainly it's how a lot of most organizations start managing data, and it's how many still do. Can you talk a little bit about what it was? I mean, I know you come from a technology background, so you had a great deal of kind of acumen with what it means to be in the cloud and how important sort of ERP processes are to an organization like this. But can you talk about what motivated you to sort of transform from or migrate from an Excel-based system into a cloud-based ERP framework and what that process felt like, looked like, what was really effective for you and your organization, or things you would avoid in the future, any lessons you can deliver to the other listeners?
Sure, I could take a couple parts of that question. Excel, I think we a group of us are corporate offices in Charlotte, North Carolina, where a lot of people have kind of located their lives and families, or I shouldn't say a lot, we're the handful of folks that are on the leadership team here at MANA. And we were at the factory and said, we're not leaving until we at least have something that's ERP-ish in Excel. And so the product of that was Clipboard 1.0. So lots of tabs, all of our raw materials, all of our, the bill of materials that go in, finished product, lot tracking. And that really was a good exercise in business process design and having the stakeholders involved in understanding that. But we didn't use it long enough to become married to that process where it was like, oh, we really like that. What's this new thing? And so for us, it was really a business process enabler. We had then Clipboard 2.0, and that was our final version of our Excel ERP system before we went live with NetSuite. And then those same stakeholders, when we went live, and I think this is a real positive, is the way that was implemented is we did it daily. And so we kind of co-configured around different business processes with those stakeholders involved and the company that we used to do our implementation. And that was really a wonderful process. And so that way, when it was done, they had ownership in it, they had input in it, the screens weren't unfamiliar to them, and it allowed us to go live pretty gracefully. I would say the one caveat or con, if you will, the pro is the daily configuration or co-configuration. The con is you tend to over-engineer things at times. Like, all right, it's my turn at bat. I'm going to take a big swing if I'm that stakeholder. And so I think it's just a reminder to myself and anyone else that's going to do a process like this is design it for the end user in mind who's not living in that data model or whatever that expertise might be. They're using it for a specific function. We had a couple, we had I think a financial approval process and routing that was overcomplicated. We also had a finished product when we put product on hold that didn't meet finished product standards. We over-engineered that up front, and then when we actually used it, we realized the process should be different. So those are a couple examples of how we went from Excel to NetSuite. And we did our due diligence. We looked at some of the likely suspects for ERP, and this was back in 2011. So everyone wasn't cloud yet. And so it became a real no-brainer for us, not only to look at the cloud-based solution from NetSuite, but also the discount that they offer nonprofits was amazing.
Excellent, yeah. And what you've just spoken to now a moment ago, it kind of speaks to the idea of that NetHope speaks about widely, and we like to integrate into how we present, digital transformation, which is a people, process, technology evolution. And I think, what you've just said about there not being a great deal of resistance initially because people weren't necessarily married to the Excel systems or to any other system, so there wasn't a great deal of resistance. But the fact that you focus on that does remind us all that sometimes the biggest impediment to change or the biggest facilitator of change is the people involved, right? So that's the first step in any digital transformation, is to ensure your stakeholders are on board and that they have buy-in and that they have the skills and the tools necessary, and then from there to talk about the processes that need to take place, and then from there only later to talk about which technology. So I like hearing your answer, because it really does speak to the people part of this, and then process-wise, how does that all get going and get working, and then only then, okay, so who's in the cloud? What technology solution can we look at? That makes a lot of sense. What about other types of technology solutions that you use? I mean, I'm keen. We know that NetSuite has been an interesting and helpful ERP partner to you, but are there any other types of technology solutions that Mana Nutrition employs that either speak to the NetSuite instance or don't, but that help you to deploy your services and to advance your work? Is there any kind of other parts of your technology ecosystem that you'd want to talk about?
We use Google Apps. We have since the beginning with NetSuite, and I think that bundled together has been great. And then really anything else we've looked at, whether it's access control to the building or the time clock systems, all those were like, they all need to be cloud-based. And so once a few things are, I think that's great. We have deployed Chromebooks a bit too, as ways to make it easier for warehouse workers to keep connected.
Yeah. One of the processes we've undertaken together is the Hackathon. So every year at the Suite World, So every year at Suite World, we do the big hackathon event, and we invite customers to come in with big problems, right? And then we put a team of product folks and whomever else is kind of relevant to that problem on the case and ideate and theorize around a solution. And I understand that Mana had quite an interesting hackathon experience in the last few years, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about sort of what the problem was, how the problem was formulated initially, and then what kind of solution was constructed and what kind of impact that has had.
Yeah, great. Glad you brought that up. We're thrilled to be a part of the hackathon. We had a couple different challenge statements that we brought, and the one that we ended up going with was related to the finished product testing. And we had designed the process controls that we wanted. So the way that we check these packets as they come off the different packaging machines, like you saw on the photo, how do we test those packets at what intervals? And we looked at some Six Sigma. We actually had some folks help us with designing that, the test criteria. And then we said, how do we bring this into NetSuite? How do we make it one system inside NetSuite? And so that was really what we designed there, where there was then a nice web-based suitelet that machine operators can run their tests, hit enter, and even down to the, and what was so great is we had all these teams contributing really good ideas of how to make this solution happen. It reminded me that I don't know NetSuite as well as I'd love to, and the things they came up with were really creative and solved our problem in a nice way. And the winning team has gone on to help us kind of fine-tune it and get it into production, which I think it's going into production in the next week or two, which is exciting for us. And it's a good reminder, too, you know, the hackathon is a really short time interval and you get a lot of learning. But to go from that learning to implementation and production, sometimes the last 20% is really the 80% of the effort, and they've been really good about helping us narrow down the details of how that all works. And I got to say, it's been really nice because we had a little bit of scope creep where it then became the way that we wrap up that daily build of materials. So when we finish making a lot of mana, there's the finished product quality tests that will roll up that happen every hour. That was what we did at the hackathon. But then they also improved the whole way that we wrap up that lot and display the quality information about that lot. So that was good. It was a really helpful thing. And I think the customizations that we've needed in NetSuite have really been around the quality processes, just because we have unique requirements for finished goods quality.
Yeah, I was really touched. I mean, when I heard about your the solution that was kind of designed and how that's been in implementation over the last few months, I was, to be honest, also kind of wowed by the fact that, you know, using the ERP, you're able to ensure efficiency of the process by weighing sort of a sachet or a collection of materials in a sachet every 100 or so that you can kind of monitor the reliability and the exactness of each sachet going out of RUTF. And that being able to do that, it kind of provides for more efficiency and allows you to manufacture faster. And, you know, this is what I love, the sort of confluence of a real-world technology solution that then, you know, in its impact, allows you to manufacture more, faster, and more efficiently.
That's right. Yeah, and the sachets are 92 grams, and so if you're a few grams under or over, it's a big deal. You know, if you're, and you don't want to be under because you don't want to, you know, cheat the client or the kid. So you tend to go, well, we'll be a little over, but that's expensive in a low margin nonprofit business. And so we now, with the implementation at the hackathon, there's automatic weight tests, and the automatic weight tests actually feed information back to the filling heads of the packaging machines to make adjustments in real time. So it's pretty amazing. And then they also roll that data into NetSuite, so we have kind of a consolidated view of what things look like for that day of production. And then if things are outside of a kind of a red line threshold, it will send alerts to different folks at the factory. So it's been good. It's nice to have that in place.
Outstanding. And one of the things you kind of touched on earlier that I think is so important is, as we think about the next frontier of this work, is transparency and community engagement and community empowerment with regard to the product entering the community and who receives it, who is tracking what has come into this community, what has gone out, who has received which of the RUTFs. You know, those community action, those CMAMs are such an important part of this conversation going forward. And I'd like it if you could talk a little bit about sort of where we are in conversations now and into the future, the conversations we've been having around how do we start tracking the sachets as they leave the manufacturing site and are deployed into the communities, and how can we more effectively ensure transparency and empower the receivers with QR codes and with things like that, so that they can at a glance, have an idea of when their RUTF was manufactured, where it came from, and what community it's meant to go to. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that element of community empowerment and bringing the beneficiaries of this program into the driver's seat is such an important value position that you all have had throughout. And now we're starting to honor that through technological means and solutions. So if you can talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, happy to. And I see there's a couple questions along those lines too, so hopefully we can kind of cover that. So on the supply chain, and thinking about, end to end, we've done a lot of work around all the inputs, so the raw materials that come through, how those are handled, our relationships with those suppliers, the types of qualifications that those products need, the standards that they need. We have a 2-year shelf life product, and so they become, that part has been fine-tuned, and also the ability to extend donations or donated peanuts, for example. That's a wonderful thing until you tell your accountant to implement that in a way that, how do we handle that costing and give them donation credit? What does that look like? And so it's been nice to be able to do all that with an ERP system like NetSuite on the supply side for us. And then we're hopefully, humble enough to realize, like, we're the manufacturer. That's amazing, but it's not the most amazing part. There's so many wonderful organizations doing programs on the ground around the world, and that coordination with is kind of three different organizations. Typically, it's the Ministry of Health identifying what they need, where their gaps are, what organizations are working in their communities that run these CMAN programs, so Community Management for Acute Malnutrition. So that kind of creates the distribution network. And UNICEF has done a lot of work with those organizations, and they're the biggest buyer at the time currently for RUTF, although I think they would agree that they didn't intend on being the buyer. Most of the products that they receive can get donated, like pharmaceuticals. With this product, there's a real cost to it. So it's been an interesting challenge for us. And one of the things that we're looking to do is have some conversations with some of the other payers like USAID and UNICEF to say they're buying a lot of this product. It's getting distributed often directly through these aid organizations I would say in cooperation, but it really depends on the country, with the Ministry of Health. So usually the product goes directly to the aid organization, and they facilitate the warehousing and distribution of that and kind of the last mile delivery. So for us, we're kind of at an interesting position where we're eager to help, and we're actually having a meeting tomorrow and talking about that with USAID, and actually probably more listening to see how we can adjust our product packet. What would be interesting? What if there was a QR code that anybody could scan? It tells you about the product, where it was manufactured, and you can do an incident report right there and not wait for a longer, slower system to kind of come up. So pushing a lot of that data down directly is something we're gonna be willing to kind of be in the technology readiness position to say, let's pilot that, let's implement that, let's adjust our packets in this way so we can have field reporting enabled at a packet level. And then if that works for RUTF, how might it work for other commodities or other products that are being purchased by folks like USAID? Does that answer your question much, Kate? Is there another question?
No, I think that's brilliant. And I'm conscious of time, and I see that some really rich conversation or questions are coming in the chat box. So if you don't mind, Frederick, I'll just kind of jump in and start reading the ones that are visible to me and allowing Troy to respond. Is that all right?
That'd be perfect. Thank you.
Great. So the first, I'll just do them in order of their appearance, is on the topic of managing supply chain systems for international food aid. This involves a host of stakeholders, from raw material suppliers, producers, distributors, and aid organizations. Can you discuss how digital technology can assist from start to end? Kate, you mentioned the nonprofit ecosystem. Excellent. So can I hand that over to you, Troy, and you can talk a little bit about sort of the supply chain, how materials move from suppliers to producers to distributors, and the involvement of aid organizations. You've spoken a bit about it, but maybe if you have any additional thoughts in response to this question.
Yeah, sure can. So just to clarify, I mean, I think for most products that are similar to ours, there's a payer that buys a product, and then there's a distributor. In some case, the distributor is also the payer. So like MSF, for example, they procure a lot of RUTF directly. They also receive a lot from UNICEF. And so in the case that, when the product leaves Mana, it's typically an FOB, they pick it up at our warehouse, or we deliver it to port, and then they take care of that distribution when it hits whatever port it arrives in internationally. And so that's been the traditional model, and I think there's increasing conversations about how do we connect the conversations, how do we connect the data points so that there's a little more responsiveness on our end, like the RFP processes can be long and slow when there's gaps to fill that weren't anticipated. So if there's an incident that creates an influx of refugees in a conflict zone, and now they need product to treat more kids, it's really expensive to airlift that product. What if we could be a little quicker, basically a little quicker and still get ocean freight involved, and reduce the amount of product that needs to be airlifted. And so there's some things like that would create real impact in not only cost savings, but for the people being served. And I think those are the conversations we're looking to have right now. Traditionally, I don't think the suppliers have been as involved in the field delivery system. And so I think there's a lot more. I know, WFP is piloting a program. There's a few different programs that, I know less about than maybe even some folks on the call, but that's definitely the next frontier for us to jump in and spend some time and try to be helpful and engaging in how do we help the field side a lot more than we have been.
Right. Thank you. And I'll just kind of throw in here that the last part of that question was what did I mean by the nonprofit ecosystem, or how are we thinking about that? And I think just to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, we understand that organizations like Nutrition have a host of obligations as far as data reporting to lots of different stakeholders, right? From governments to departments of health to UNICEF to USAID to the other partners to their communities. And we understand that it's our job as a vendor and as a cloud-based product supplier to think about what we do really well, and then how do we integrate with the other members of this community. And it's one of the reasons we've become, founding sponsors of the Center for the Digital Nonprofit, is that we understand this is an important actor, an important member of the community that has an important voice around technology for international aid organizations. And we want to be privy to those conversations and benefit from the fruits of those conversations. And also we want to contribute what we know and what we've seen in our experiences, and also receive and learn from the experiences of the members. So that's one part of the ecosystem. Another part would be other technology companies. Another part would be governments and donor communities. I mean, this is a small point that I'll just put out there, but one of our big problems with the donor community orientation toward technology is that it's typically the case that large donors consider technology an overhead expense rather than a program expense. And it's quite an interesting and motivating point for me right now and for our team that we start to engage with the international aid donors, USAID, DFID, Irish Aid, CEDA, the kind of lexicon of the donor community, to start having this conversation in a more robust way. And we can get in the room because we are a technology company and, we've got something to add to what they're interested in. But part of that is really to also convince donors that they have to think about technology differently when it comes to funding programs. So that's just a kind of side point. Next question, Troy, is as you moved from your Excel to NetSuite ERP solution, what did it take from an implementation and staff training perspective? Can you talk about timing as well as internal efforts to get everyone on board?
Sure thing, and I might have covered this one previously a little bit. I saw that question up there, so I kind of bent a response previous to this, but we launched with Excel, and you really use that to design the business process, because designing that after you've implemented the ERP is not fun. So getting our business process down, bill of materials, manufacturing process, raw materials checks, finished product checks, some of those basic things, and then obviously the accounting ledgers. Figuring that out ahead of time while we're using QuickBooks and Excel, and then quickly move to implement NetSuite. We did try to look at other options, and I think a lot of us tend to grow organically because we take the next step. So there was a brief moment where I think we had an intern researching, well, what kind of inventory management systems can we bolt onto QuickBooks just to buy us some time? And that fortunately turned into some undesirable outcomes. So like, we don't want to do that. Let's just move really fast on NetSuite. So that was what we did. And I mentioned we did the daily configuration with our NetSuite consultant. And she was great. And we still stay in touch with Pam. She no longer works at that company, but she was a part of our startup. And we would do a video screen share with the stakeholders. And then she would go away every morning, and she would go away and work on the fine-tuning of whatever changes need to happen in that process, if any, and then come back and demonstrate that the next morning, and everyone kind of signed off. Great, looks good. Move on to the next business unit. So we went business unit by business unit in that process, and that worked great. And I think it just, like I mentioned before, setting a expectation to design it for the end user, not for the advanced finance person who, may be able to handle a more complicated workflow because they're in the process every day. And so really thinking of whatever the business unit is, how do we make that something that, and then probably revisiting it later is good too.
Thank you. And
yeah.
Yes. So you kind of covered this one earlier, but I'm just going to put it out there because it was asked, and maybe you have another example or point around it. When your product leaves your factory, how does your ERP help track the state of your products in the field? Are you able to digitally integrate with downstream distribution and humanitarian organizations?
We are able to, and we would love to. Currently, we do not. And so if there's organizations that would like to pilot something like that, feel free to reach out to me. The other thing that is an interesting larger picture view is when you move away from government donors, which are the largest ones for the product we have, and you look at, community foundations, corporate foundations, private foundations, family offices. So these folks that moving down to the public donors, they want a lot more transparency in the impact that their dollar is providing. And so if we're able to have a system that shows, wow, here's the gap analysis from Save the Children, whoever it might be, World Vision, that shows the product they need in this community, that they, and then a lot of the product is planned for, and that's great, but when there's these gaps, there is donor availability. If we could connect the dots and bring that in with technology and show here's the gap, here's the opportunity to make an impact with funding and manage at the ready to fulfill in a quick way, that would be a really elegant way to help solve the problem that we're trying to address and affect other sectors as well. But that would be an example of that end-to-end supply chain response. So I think it does need to include the donor that you mentioned, Kate.
Yeah. Okay, I see I've been asked to wrap up, and I see some wonderful questions coming through still. So I regret that we're not going to be able to cover them right now, but please do connect with Troy and myself on LinkedIn or in any other ways. If you want to get involved or learn more about the Suite donation program or about our work with any of the organizations we've mentioned today, or you want to talk about ERP, please feel free to reach out to Social Impact. Troy, is there any kind of final thoughts or calls to action from your end?
No, nothing on my end. If something sparked your interest or you have an idea or opportunity or question, you're welcome to contact me directly.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Troy, and we'll hand it back over to Frederick.
Super. Well, thank you very much, both of you. Very, very interesting and a great starting point for deeper integration in the sector, and I'm looking forward to having further discussions as we go along. We will be sharing Kate and Troy's email addresses in the follow-up email, so if you want to get in touch with them, you can also do so via email. Just remains for me to thank you both very much. Thank the attendees for great questions and good interaction. And please do click on that extra little link to go to our webinar satisfaction survey once you leave WebEx. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.